this, that the IEP for Home, which is what this series is called, is actually a multi-seminar series. And if you look up my YouTube video, you'll get the overview view. And I actually cover everything up to rules. I don't actually cover rules. So if you look up YouTube IEP for Home and Von Hahn, you'll catch me. And it'll put today's seminar into context. So the IEP for Home, just so that you know the bigger structure, it's I've forgotten how many seminars. I think it's 7 seminars, and it starts with building a relationship with your child, is chapter 1 or seminar number 1. Number 2 is teaching good sleeping habits. Number 3 is teaching good eating habits. Number 4 is schedules, and number 5 is rules. So we're going to do rules today. Matthew, you said something really important about you don't really have rules in your house and you're not sure if you should. And I love it when there aren't rules, okay? Because a household that functions really well has implicit rules, but they're not highly explicit. They sort of have to be when kids are young, but over time they should be just embedded into the routines of the family life. And you don't have to worry about policing the rules because you've really been building good habits all along, and so you don't run into the trouble of having rules. And then you also don't run into the trouble of having to police them or to have consequences or reinforcers. Now, that doesn't mean that you never have any rules, that you never have any consequences or reinforcers. Those tools are useful as well. But if there's one lesson that I'd love you to walk away from today, is that those probably shouldn't be your go-to strategies. So having, especially the rewards and consequences, well, especially consequences actually, shouldn't be your go-to strategy. And just as an anecdote for you to know where I'm coming from, almost always, I see a lot of kids with difficult behaviors or very challenging behaviors, right? It's like 50% of my practice. And almost always when I ask families, have you gotten any professional advice before? Or what do you do when your kid does X? They always tell me about the consequences that they use, right? And very often they tell me the consequences don't work, okay? And that's actually a really important lesson, is that you have to start out with a lot more skills building a relationship with your kid, making sure there's good sleeping and eating habits, making sure there's a good schedule. A lot of the rules kind of take care of themselves when you've embedded some of the other work into your family from the start. 2-year-olds are tough. One of the main reasons they're so tough is because they have such poor impulse control. In fact, they really don't have any, right? They don't, right? And it's something that you can realistically expect 4-year-olds to do, to really inhibit their responses and to follow rules. It's definitely a 4-year skill. It doesn't mean that you can't teach it before the age of 3, but I think the going is slow. And I think by the time kids are 4, especially when they're going into preschool, they're really starting to learn about those rules. You're probably in great shape, with the 2-year-old. I don't know about the 5-year-old.
That's good to hear, because I don't feel like...
Yeah. Well, you're actually working on something higher order. So the 3 of you have brought up the 3 things that I wanted to discuss. So one of them is you have to have safety rules, and those are the most important. The second one is having rules around privileges. Screen time is a huge one, okay? We've got to talk about privileges and rules related to privileges. The third one is social rules, and that one's harder. That one, because it usually involves more than one person, and those are harder to teach. They're really worth teaching. They become much more meaningful to kids once they're in social groups, for example, in school or even preschool, okay? So in that order, safety rules first, privileges and rules related to privileges second, and then social rules third. To really think carefully about the schedule and setting up your expectations successfully, okay? So that the kids know when are certain tasks supposed to get done. Some of them are routine tasks that they're doing very well already, and some of them might not be, like tidying up your bedroom is probably not always part of the routine, but dressing and getting ready for school is. But you want to have personal care and then take care of your belongings and then help out in the household are 3 categories of routines that probably occur at least weekly, but a lot of them occur daily. And you want to make sure that those are in the schedule and that the kids know what the schedule is. Okay. So having a prior conversation with the kids about the schedule really helps. When you have a really, really clearly defined sleeping and eating schedule, that's kind of what I call the physiological backbone for your schedule. It really helps regulate the kids' behaviors. And young kids and kids with developmental disabilities are especially susceptible to the schedule, which is both good and bad. They really do better when the schedule is really tightly maintained. they do much more poorly when the schedule becomes wobbly, okay? But the first thing is they've got to know about what the schedule is and what's in it. Now, what I wanted to talk about today was how do you put safety rules and privileges into the schedule, okay? We need to talk a bit about screen time because that's such a big ticket item. And then, but we need to talk about safety first because it's actually more important. How many of you are having difficulty with safety rules? Usually it's not a big problem, but I'm just curious if any of you have been teaching any safety rules. And why don't you talk or think a little bit about why you've been successful? This is true for all of you. What accounts for your success with safety rules? Parents never complain. They don't complain about safety rules very often. They don't worry about them very often. No. And I want you to think carefully about how consistently you taught that rule and what the consequences were for them not following the rule. Because probably you were ironclad about it. Because it can make a parent feel panicky if your kid's not following safety rules. Okay?
So for us, I think being consistent and just sticking with it over time, and then the maturity on my kids' part.
Yeah, I mean, you want them to understand the concept behind the rule. That's always best, okay? But young kids don't necessarily understand the concept. They just need to be told what to do, and they need to be policed. And one thing that I think parents are almost universally good at is teaching those safety rules. The one that comes up in my practice the most is street safety rules, especially when you're on an outing with your child. That's one that not all parents feel like they really nailed it down. But I never hear them talking about my kid plays with knives or my kid's getting into the poisons underneath the cupboard or my kid touches the stove. It comes up sometimes with the really, really active kids that are preschoolers. But I'm always interested that those are not the ones that the parents are struggling with the most. And I think the reason is because those are the rules that parents are the most convinced have to be taught. And you guys are really consistent about teaching them. You're even a little bit panicky about teaching them in a good way. And they really get learned, okay? And I need you to focus on those kinds of successes because there's a similar kind of dedication and determination that you have to bring when you're teaching about privileges, okay? They're not life-threatening the same way, but screen time rules are really worth investing in. I think that there's a price to be paid for kids that don't understand that screens have to be used on a limited basis and that recreational screen time use is just one of a larger package of things that you can do recreationally. We in the clinic, typically we say, reserve your shouting and yelling when safety is at issue. So that's a generic thing that commonly works really well, is that you don't raise your voice unless there's danger. Because you actually want to build a bit of a startle response in your child when there's danger. You want them to have that fight-flight reaction to the hot stove or to danger in the street or to knives. Because that really, it really ingrains a very protective or self-protective response down the road, okay? Not necessarily that you want to overdo it, but that's, if you want to yell at your kids, that's an appropriate time to be using your yelling, okay? For that reason, it really helps to ingrain that rule. The yelling is not usually needed for other rules, okay? And in fact, you start to shoot yourself in the foot if you do too much yelling because it doesn't become potent enough. The yelling starts to lose its efficacy, its potency goes down. And the kids aren't learning from you anymore. They're just getting startled or jangled, but they don't always know why. Because there is a difference between screen time rules and safety rules. There isn't an immediate danger if you spend a half hour extra on the screen, okay? But it is a habit that you want to build. And in the case of screen time rules, there's a couple of challenges that I've had to kind of work my head around a little bit because screen time rules have really changed from when I first started practicing because there's so many screens. It's unbelievable how many screens we have in our houses now, which we didn't have when I was first in training. So it's harder to control them. That's one major factor. The other one is, especially for teenagers, there's this blend between recreational screen time and screen time that you need to do for your schoolwork, and it's hard to control what is your teenager using the screen for? Is it for something productive that they need for their homework, or are they really just gaming or socializing with their friends and getting themselves distracted? And that's a really hard one to control. And the third one is, I just think that the way that the screens operate now, again, because I'm an older guy, I know how it was before. The pace is really fast, and there's an addictive quality that I think has really become much more pronounced with screen time than used to be the case. And it's literally harder to get off the screen. And adults are having just as much of a hard time with this as kids are. They might not be having as many tantrums about it when it stops, but there's this kind of addictive, we're kind of drawn back to the screen, even if it's just to check our emails or our text messages and stuff. And it's really, it doesn't really enhance your life. You have to really think carefully, like, why am I doing this, okay? It's still good for the kids to know when's the start time and when's the stop time. And how well have any of you been able to pull that off? What's the start time and what's the stop time for your screen time? Yeah, there's two reasons it's so important. So a lot of the times when parents tell me about their kids' tantrums, it's related to the time when the parents say turn the screen off. And a lot of the reasons why the kids are tantruming so badly is because they never actually know when the turn off time is going to be scheduled. So they're always taken a little bit by surprise, and they're always going to fight it, right? But if it's pre-scheduled, it's much easier to do this when there's a school day to schedule you or to structure you. But when it's pre-scheduled, it just makes it a lot easier that the start time is predetermined and so is the stop time. And in fact, some of the, I'm not really good at this, but some of the programs they can shut themselves off precisely because parents are having such a hard time with this. It's a nice strategy to use if you can use it automatically shuts down after a certain number of minutes, because then at least the kids aren't blaming you. They're not getting mad with you for having turned the screen off. But you should really endorse the rule. I mean, you should really say, look, I want to make sure that, we have some control over the screen time. You can give whatever reasons you want to give. There's other things to be done during the day. After your screen time, we're going to do X. And if they know in advance that that's what the process is, it makes it much easier. Now, right? And rewards are not privileges. Privileges are something that you get for free, right? You might not get them every day, and you might only get them once a year, but you don't have to be a good boy or a good girl to get privileges. They're built into the schedule. Rewards, on the other hand, are something that you get for doing some sort of exceptional service, like you help to clean out the garage, or and then you could actually get an allowance for that, or you help to do yard work, or you help to maybe clean the kitchen floor, or something that's a bit above and beyond the usual, and then you can get a reward. So that's where we like to see rewards being used. But
I think it's interesting that you brought up. It's interesting the difference between a reward and a privilege.
Yeah.
It can be a little confusing, definitely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's the confusion that you're
just that privilege is something that's a free. It's which makes sense. I never really thought of it like that. It's
okay.
Like a free, versus a reward, which is you do something because of something.
Right. I mean, all of us have a reward of a paycheck by going to work. Right. I actually really like my job, and I actually don't know if I would work for free, but I would probably, if someone were paying for all my expenses, I would probably work for free. But I need the paycheck to show up on time, right? That's kind of my reward, okay? I get more than just a paycheck out of it. But, that's sort of a basic example. And I think it is an important, it's like a pre-vocational skill. I mean, kids do need to learn that from work come privileges and rewards. So I think it's a good thing to instill. We're going to finish up. Actually, the hour's almost over. Brenda, did I answer your questions about your teenage sons, or do you feel any further ahead today, or not really?
Yeah, a little bit. I think they just need to be more consistent and just not let them wiggle around.
Yeah, it's hard, especially when they explode at you. One of the difficulties, though, with teenagers is that, again, all the stuff that I've talked about, it's really useful for young kids, and it's useful for kids with disabilities. But I'm talking about kids whose mental age is not at the teenager level yet. Because part of the job of being a teenager is to start to create your own rules and to follow them yourself, right? And to really understand self-regulation, really manage your own behavior successfully, especially outside the home. It's really the job of the teenager to start to take on some of these more adult-like responsibilities. And you can see how well they're doing. Like, not so great. They still actually need a huge amount of adult supervision, and it's a hard balancing act to find. I would love your 19-year-old to self-regulate screen time. Might not be realistic, okay? But there are things that your 19-year-old needs to learn about managing your own behaviors and evaluating whether the decisions that you made are good for you or not good for you. It's a really important teenager skill, because once they leave the home at age 20 or 22 or whenever that happens, you may or may not be around to do the regulation work with them.